Mamma mia. Who knew that pizza could have so much to do with sex? We all know that baseball has been used. You get a home run, you score, right guys? Well, things have changed. Now, when you roll over and your wife isn't interested and you're too scared to even touch her, and women, you have a man who doesn't know how to meet your emotional needs, so you're turned off and don't even want to give in. The answer always was there, and the answer is pizza. Who's decorating the slice of pizza tonight? You both can get pleasure, and maybe spontaneity was a little bit too overrated. It's your turn to get yours tonight. Your answer is here. All right, see you there. Welcome to the Life in Red podcast. This is a way of life that emphasizes positive sexuality, self-love, and confidence. On this journey, red is now your new color. Be courageous. Be passionate. Be sexy. And never stop living your best red life. So now I have one question for you. Are you ready to live your life in red? To join us on this journey, like and subscribe below. Hello, and this is Brittany, your host, and welcome to the Life in Red. Today in the Life in Red, things are gonna get a little pizza-y. We're gonna talk about sex in a way maybe you have never heard it talked about. In this episode, we're shaking it up with a conversation around sexual communication. And today we have the dynamic Dr. Jason Jones. That's fun to say. And today with Dr. Jones, who, by the way, is a director, registered psychologist. He's with the AASCT, Certified Sex Therapist Association. But guys, get ready to spice up your sex life as we delve into the deliciously tantalizing world of sexual communication. Who doesn't have a hard time talking about sex? Thank you, Dr. Jones, for being here with us today. We all need your help. So thank you. Welcome. So what got you into this line of work of helping people with sexual communication and all the things I'm sure you do around this subject matter?
Yeah, so I've been a registered psychologist for about 15 years in Alberta, Canada, and I started my work looking at some of the most vulnerable areas for people. And I began that work with weight and body image stuff, and seeing how crucial and how deep that vulnerability lurks for them. And what that translates into is the deeper the vulnerabilities, the more potential for healing, the more potential for, really deep work to really have corrective emotional experiences for people. So I found that going into the most vulnerable spaces was often the best way to get real sustainable change. And so I didn't want to be afraid of any area, because I felt like, the further we go into vulnerability, the more that actually ends up helping people, which obviously brings me straight into sexual health. And that being, one of the most taboo areas still, even though there's more conversation about it than there's been. It's a very vulnerable area for people. It is not a safe place for them to discuss things openly and honestly and transparently and without fear of judgment and all of that. So going into the sexual space with people, is really a way to tap into very deep vulnerabilities around themselves as people. And from there, that's where you can get some beautiful work done. Just going through the pathway of sexuality can be so illuminating for individuals, and understanding so much more about themselves in an area that they've been very limited in traditionally, because of our culture and society.
Well, thank you so much for that. That was beautifully said. The fact that you chose vulnerability, you took on people's monsters in their closets, the boss at the end of the video game. You were like, I could take on all these mini missions on the surface, but let's go straight to the core. Let's get in there, because I can imagine being in your shoes, like how, amazing that feels that you're helping them, but in such a large, large way. And it's so beautiful what you do. It truly is. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So all of us out there who need it, for sure.
And we all kind of do. Like, even if we are professionals, even if we've been trained and educated in different ways, we still grew up in a society that is repressive around our sexual expressions. And so we're all kind of in this together, trying to go through this journey and tapping into our vulnerabilities so that we can really learn about really who we are, what we need, what our bodies need, and then be able to direct ourselves from there.
And that's interesting. When you talk about needs in regard to sex, I think that oftentimes can be a complicated, something I've heard people fight over quite a bit in relationships. Is it really what you need to need this sexually? And is it really a need? Because compared to what? Water and food? Well, yeah, possibly. So what would you consider a need? Like, do you consider sexual needs a need? Like, I need this for my blueprint to be happy in a dynamic. Is that what you're meaning with sexual needs?
Yeah, so I think it's about people understanding themselves, how their body responds to certain sexual or intimacy cues, to kind of learn more about themselves in that space. Because there's also not an assumption that everybody has the same kind of sexual intents, or intentions around it, or energies with it. So it can also include, areas of asexuality. Where, there's not much interest in sexual experiences, but there might be a lot of interest in other aspects of it. Intimacy building, romance, some of those kind of things. So when we're looking at this, we're really trying to help people understand the nature of how they might perceive a need. What is that need about? If I feel like I need to have intercourse, what am I really getting out of intercourse? Is it the orgasm? Is it the pleasure? Is it the connection with another person? What is this actually satisfying for me? Because we don't actually need orgasms. We want.
Oh man.
We might feel like we need them at times, but that's really important to understand what's behind that need. Is it a need for connection? Is it a need for pleasure? Is it a need for excitement, playfulness? So, and then being able to communicate that to our partner about what this really is. And it can be dangerous, because you can actually hold someone hostage by telling them that you need this. I need this. If you loved me, you would give me my needs, right? And that's, where people can get stuck. And that's where some of these communication tools are really helpful, to give people an opportunity to talk about these things where it doesn't feel quite as heavy or emotionally intense.
Well, that's a great way to, and as you're talking, I'm reflecting on personal experience. I can't help it. And if one does get into a relationship with someone who's asexual, and if I'm correct, asexuality is, there's not necessarily a sexual, you are not wanting to have sex with either gender. It's just sex is not you're not really wanting to have sex. Is that about right?
Well, so asexuality is still, a concept that's really only about 20, 25 years old. I think that we're still learning a lot about what it really means and the diversity that's actually within it. So there's a whole spectrum of asexual or ace experiences that people have. Sometimes it is just that it's not about intercourse. And there's other areas, because even when we say asexual or heterosexual, what do we mean by sex? What do we mean by sexual? Because we can have all kinds of different definitions about that.
Right. Well, I always wondered with asexuality and demisexuality, I think I tried to pathologize everything. And it's my nature to get to the core of things. I have fun doing that. And I thought maybe, someone who this was like an older version of me that was trying to figure out myself. Like if I had no interest in sex, well, I've had sexual trauma. So that could be a comorbidity of that, not something that I was born into an identity necessarily. But then we are in this new way of thinking in psychology that we're not pathologizing as much anymore. And it's like acceptance. Well, yes, you've had trauma, this, and that. So as of now, you identify as this. And it's fluid. It can change. And that's okay too. It's not about sitting here when your want changes or your needs change, then you don't have to be that. Like someone being gay and then maybe deciding to be bi. Because they find attraction to an opposite gender. So I was just curious if any of that resonates.
Yeah, well, there is kind of a discussion point there with clients about how does this feel for you in terms of a definition, or what does that definition actually mean? Because again, that's about, people are only going to identify those kind of things based on what they believe their body's responding to, again, kind of around needs and wants, so that they can understand, if their body is responding to a sexual cue in a certain way, that's okay. That's not maybe within their will or their choice of doing that. So, but if they understand, how certain things impact them and what they need out of that to either repair or kind of resolve some of it, then that's really important. So it's like a whole spectrum of sexuality, asexuality being, kind of one component of it. But the whole thing is about how does any one individual explore the nature of their sexuality in a safe way, and in a way that they feel like they can bond with somebody else, be able to feel vulnerable and have that validated and empathized with, so that it's safe.
Well, that's so beautiful. And for me personally, I'd rather do that single. It's really scary when I have been in relationships, and I'm sure you guys out there may relate to this. It's like you've been married for 10 years. And in this day and age, we don't communicate about sex. So you've been married for 10 years. He's over here watching anime stuff and you find out and you don't know why. And it's like, well, you guys maybe haven't communicated your fantasies, your needs, your desires around pleasure and different things like that. And then you go get help from a psychologist or a therapist to help unpack this. And then you find out things that could be, some things are deal breakers. Like that's not me. And that's a heavy need for me. And people are afraid to lose each other. So it's so much easier for me, in my opinion, is if we could just figure this out while we're single. It's like, what do I like? Then we don't have to worry about any of that later. You know what I'm saying?
If there's a transferability of our solo sexual lives into a partnered sexual life, and sometimes there is, and sometimes there's a wide gap between those two pieces.
Right.
And that's so essential for people to talk about is, what is your solo sexuality like? What does it look like when I'm not a part of your sex life? What is the nature of your sex life? And we need to understand that there are differences around that, so that when people come together, no two people are going to have the same desires, the same frequency of arousal and stuff like that. There's always going to be a bit of a gap that's created. So what are we doing with that gap where, maybe the lower or the higher desire person isn't always able to access some of that sexuality and intimacy with their partner? So what's the safe way to explore sexuality for themselves where the other person is also comfortable with how that sexual experience is going? But if people don't talk about it, then you have no idea what the assumptions or expectations the other person is making about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, so it's like this keeps coming up on the show, a theme of communication. And I mean, if we look at the end of most marriages, it's communication is one of the huge pain points. And it's not just communicating about finances, guys. We're talking about sex, intimacy. And what's interesting, Dr. Jones, is you have a very unique approach with your practice that we talked about before recording today that I would love for you to share. It's a very spicy metaphor for helping people.
Can be spicy. Yeah.
It can be spicy. Okay.
So really the approach is all about finding a different metaphor for sexual experiences for partners. The old metaphor is baseball. You go to first base, you go to second base, third base, you go home. That's usually intercourse until the male orgasms.
Yeah.
That is the script. One person is on offense trying to score, and the other person is on defense trying to limit the scoring.
Oh, God. What a horrible metaphor.
It is. It's absolutely awful. Is for any kind of healthy sexuality.
God.
But that's the frame of reference, because we don't talk about this stuff enough. That's the frame of reference that people have around what their expectations and assumptions are for their sexual scripts with people. So even if they don't consciously identify with that as a belief, unconsciously, they've still been influenced and taught about sexuality in that way. So it becomes a game where you're trying to score as many runs as you can. It's not about working together. It's about competing against each other. And so all of that creates this setup, which is really, kind of a remnant of the past where men are in charge of sexuality and women are on defense. That setup will not work in terms of today, the way our society is organized now.
Oh, no.
And so we need a new metaphor for sex.
We do. And the one you have, guys, get ready. Here it is. It's amazing.
So the metaphor is about pizza. So when we can use it basically as a code word for sex, intimacy, or connection. If we're looking at having a pizza, we want to enjoy the pizza. We want to get pleasure out of the pizza. That's what our goal is. Our goal isn't to compete against someone else or rush to the finish line and have a certain script of how this is going to go. So we construct a pizza where we turn to each other and we say, hey, do you feel like having a pizza tonight? Yeah, I feel like pizza. Okay. So now let's start. Let's talk about, what do you want on this pizza? Let's negotiate what this pizza is going to look like for us together. We're going to talk about what kind of cheese, what kind of crust, what sauce, veggies, meats. And these are all just metaphors for different ways of communicating about sexuality. So with the pizza, what's beautiful about it is that it sets up a consent conversation for every time there's a sexual experience. And that's very different already, because the assumption with the baseball metaphor is that we already know where we're supposed to go with it. We're supposed to do this, then that, and then we have an orgasm. Pizza, you don't have a goal orientation with pizza. Your goal is to share in the pleasure of it and enjoy it together. So you want to set up that pizza in a way that you both are going to really enjoy. So,
right.
But also it's different every day. God. So instead of that assumption of like, we're going to round the bases, we have no assumptions about what is actually going to be on that pizza on any given night. We actually have to talk about it. It's going to be influenced by our moods, the day that we had, how much sleep we had, maybe the last time we had a sexual experience. And so that sets up the conversation that might feel a little bit safer around talking about how to negotiate setting up a pizza and then ordering it. And then there's still lots of stuff that, you know, can kind of go into that. You can order a pizza. When it comes, you might not like the look of those olives on it, and you might need to pick it off. And that's okay. You can do that. You can change your mind about what you thought you might want, and then you experienced it, didn't taste all that good. And that's okay, because we're in the pizza metaphor here. We're just trying to negotiate.
Safe in the metaphor.
Yes. Yeah, so we can have all kinds of different pizzas, and we can have different pizzas every night if we want to.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm going to extend this metaphor. So like for those, so once one becomes comfortable with their partner communicating their pizza, and they've tried all the restaurants, they got Mellow Mushroom, Pizza Hut, Domino's, you know, all the different ones, they get used to this. But the idea of spontaneity, you know, we get into spontaneity. I know that's important for me. If you know, it's like putting an order in every night, is the goal eventually to get to a place of almost like you had too much to drink and you ordered a pizza and you didn't remember, but you know it was good. You know, you don't remember ordering it, but it was good. Like, when do we get to that place?
Yeah. So also there are biases in our society around spontaneous sex being better somehow than planful sex.
Interesting.
And so there's some biases around that, because that's how society has set it up in terms of the expectations, is that we don't actually plan for sex. We don't talk about it. But why did that happen in the first place? Probably because it was a clever way of getting away from having to talk about vulnerable things.
Interesting.
And that it was probably men who spearheaded that direction to kind of set up this expectation around spontaneous sexuality being the more preferred method. When you do the research on it, there's quite a difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire. So about 2/3 of men and 1/3 of women seem to be fitting into the model where they do have more spontaneous desire. But the other half of people, so 2/3 of women and 1/3 of men, they actually are more responsive in terms of their desire. So they do not just get spontaneous jolts of lightning throughout the day that makes them think about sex and makes them starting to have desire. It just doesn't happen for them.
I've been with someone like that. Because I was asking him, do you ever see me and just go, I just want to take her? Because that sounds like a little bit of Rhett Butler, Scarlett O'Hara, you know. And he's like, no, I don't really get that. That's just not really, it's not my thing. It kind of fits with what you're saying. Maybe just some people aren't like that.
Well, and there's this assumption that everybody should be like that.
Yes.
That everybody should have like spontaneous desire from time to time. And so we get worried when we see our partner not having this spontaneous desire.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. It might mean that they are responsive desire people. So the pathway to get you told them there was something wrong with them?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. How could you not desire this when you look at it?
I mean, today's not my best day, but when I'm on. No, right. I mean, because that's how I was with him. I'd see him and it was like the cartoon, like, like, oh, you know?
So one person has more of a spontaneous desire kind of system. The other person is more responsive. And yeah, the cultural assumption is that there's something wrong with the person who's not initiating, who's not thinking about sex. This goes back to all the way in the 60s when they first studied sexual health with Masters and Johnson. The way that they set up their human sexual response model was that you have desire first, then you get aroused, you have an orgasm, and you refract. And so we've pathologized desire as being, if you don't have this spontaneous desire that was assumed in that original model, then you have like hypoactive sexual desire disorder. There's something wrong with you. All humans are supposed to have this natural spontaneous desire. But that was in the 60s. That kind of research, is problematic. While there were some female participants, it's still much more oriented to the male perspective of sexuality. That's why 2/3 of men fit more into the spontaneous model of sexuality that Masters and Johnson had. And so that's been in all of our literature, all of our research, even in our DSM, about how we diagnose sexual health disorders, with this assumption that every human, as long as they're healthy, is going to have spontaneous desire. But that's been a setup and a trap for us for the last 60 years. It wasn't until about 2000 that other models, that were more circular and seemed to speak much more to the female perspective, which is generally more responsive desire.
Yeah.
And that came along. So you have these expectations, right? You also think like all men should have spontaneous desire.
Yeah.
So when a man doesn't kind of fit into that, we're wondering like, what's wrong, right? But it can be just that, however their sexuality was configured, it ended up being responsive. So it's not going to be something spontaneous for them. You actually have to plan it. You have to set it up. You have to set all the context correctly in order to have that natural desire emerge. But it emerges from the context, not from just out of thin air.
Wow. That's, have you ever had with sexual arousal? I know that we can create chemistry with intentionality. We can create chemistry. We can create pleasure. We can create desire through touch, through certain things by learning ourselves. But there's something about that, sexual tension? Usually for me, it's with distance or anger. So, one of those two oftentimes will build up the ball of, I want you. And I like a lot of distance, and don't piss me off. No, I'm kidding. Sound like a bad girlfriend.
But separation does breed desire. Now, that's one of the things, too, that is difficult for couples, because we're also taught that if, you love each other and everything's happy and stuff, the sex is just supposed to follow. It's just supposed to work somehow.
Right.
And so people think that the more they are together, the better that will be. And we've been taught about soulmates, to become one kind of Disney crap. And none of that is really what people actually experience. So we actually need some of that separateness or that distance to fuel the desire. And that might be some of the context that's being set up when you go through a process like this, learning about how your body responds to different things, that actually separateness rather than closeness may breed some of this desire and fan the flames as well. But again, that's something for everybody to talk about. And in a relationship, you might have two very different kind of experiences around that.
Yeah, because we got to be careful. From what I'm gathering from you and I'm learning as I've started the show, is blanket statements need to maybe be put in the garbage, because everyone is different. Everything's a spectrum of individuality with the question, what do you want? What do you want, Dr. Jones? What do you want, Brittany? What do you want? Not, this is the way people are, because I think it's our ego and our pride that wants a category to feel safe. And when we don't have that, it can feel so fluid and open. It's, it's quite interesting. It's very vulnerable to say, I want this. I like this. I want an extra crispy pizza, damn it, with pepperonis. And let's do some balsamic onions. Baby.
For example, yes.
Yeah. I'm just making my pizza. But I like the metaphor idea, because just like with sex therapy, when you're doing trauma therapy with children, they'll use the dolls because it's easier. It's a safer place for the mind body to be able to translate an experience that they've blacked out or don't want to talk about. Yeah. So I guess metaphors, if I'm correct about this, let me know, are just this safe place. This pizza is this safe place to say what position you want tonight, how long you're willing to go in that activity.
Yeah, metaphors, speak to the right side of our brain, our creative side of our brain. And so it actually can help us access in a different way other than language, kind of a felt sense of what's going on for us, so that it's maybe not quite as organized as like using language or verbal techniques, but you have this sense, this feeling that's coming from the metaphor that helps to inform us differently than what like any kind of language actually can. And for most people, pizza is safe. It is something that's kind of universally beloved, like there's not a lot of people that don't like pizza. I'm sorry for them. They might need to talk about like breadsticks or, something like that. But yeah, pizza is generally a very safe place and a familiar kind of positive place for people.
It truly is. And I've always said it's actually been a joke since I've been single. I think all the gentlemen I've gone out with all know my favorite food is pizza. So it's like you just can't go wrong. And so when you mentioned it was the metaphor you used with your practice, I was like, it's beautiful. But it's just perfect. I guess they could do donuts, like icing and sprinkles. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And there's a hole. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a hole there, I guess. So the other elements of the pizza that's good is because there's lots of different layers that can
that's
be put on the pizza, right? We can also even be creative about the pizza. Like, what about a half and half? So you eat this half of the pizza, I'll get this on my half. We're both kind of getting what we want, but maybe we're not sharing it at the same time, or we're not eating the same thing together, right?
Yeah.
You've got your stuff, I've got my stuff, and that's also how we're going to balance and negotiate that.
Right. So if someone was wanting one sexual activity, and one was wanting another, but it wasn't, maybe I don't need you to reciprocate this to me. I want to do this to you. So that would be kind of the difference. Another person's like, well, I don't want to do that to you either. So that's your side. And like,
yeah, you don't have to eat the same pizza. You don't have to do the same things. It doesn't have to be everything reciprocated.
Right.
It can be that the pizza that you order one night is really just kind of for one of you. And maybe the next night the pizza is going to be, for the other person. It's really about having a menu, like a sexual menu, a sexual and intimacy menu, because you don't have to be engaging in any kind of specific sexual activities to have a really satisfying, intimate pizza that you've shared together. It might not involve specific sexual acts, but it might involve cuddling, being in a bath, having, candlelight, having a nice music going on, a glass of wine or something like that. That's also like what the pizza can create as well.
That's beautiful. And I guess if someone was like, I'm going to bring, all right, honey, let's talk about the pizza. So I was thinking about a third party. So there's this Chinese restaurant next door, and we can maybe order a side of egg rolls, like I'm kidding.
Sure.
No, I'm joking. I love that. I love that it can extend to taking a bath and cuddling and different forms of intimacy that aren't just penetration and getting to the what is the movie stars show us is the ultimate goal, which it's not. It's nice, but that connection is beautiful.
Well, and when they do surveys around some of this, they surveyed thousands of women and asked them what their favorite part of sexual activity is. Only 5% of women say intercourse. But you ask men the same thing, and a lot of men, a much higher percentage of men prefer intercourse. So it's also a way of kind of equaling the playing field. This is not inevitable that intercourse is the end of this sexual activity. This is not the baseball metaphor. You are not kissing with hopes of getting it forward and moving into ultimately towards intercourse. And that's one of the biggest things that I hear from women in heterosexual relationships is, I don't want to give like a taste of the pizza because I know that he only wants this pizza inevitably. And so it limits the expression of intimacy and connection with each other if you kind of throw out the whole pizza, knowing that the person is going to be pushing for like something like intercourse. So you need to have this like experience where it's safe to express that maybe I don't want intercourse. And that's got to be okay.
Thanks for joining the Life in Red today, where we embrace passion, confidence, and positive sexuality. Keep painting your journey in bold red strokes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us so that you never miss out on living your best red life. Ready for more? Stay passionate, stay red. See you next episode.